and political power, both within and between nations. But AI is a different animal that forces us to think differently about how nations interact now and may do so in the future. You can call it AI politics. But regardless of nomenclature, in the realm of national security, we must think of AI from three vantage points: military capabilities, economic power, and societal values. To begin with military, to paraphrase Eric Schmidt's observation, in previous eras, the technologies that shaped geopolitics, from bronze to steel, steam power to nuclear fission, were largely singular. That is, there was a clear base of technical mastery, and once a country revealed it, the playing field was leveled. AI politics is different because AI is different. It is a platform for continuous innovation. There is no stasis. As Schmidt goes on to say, rather than natural resources wealth or mastery of a given technology, the source of a country's power now lies in its ability to continuously innovate. AI enables greater surveillance of an enemy's actions, greater sensors on the battlefield, greater targeting precision of weapons. One innovation that has already changed the conduct of warfare is the evolution of drones that are AI-enabled. We've seen them used increasingly and creatively in Russia's war against Ukraine. They're smaller and cheaper than conventional weapons, and they reduce soldiers' risk exposure. Micro-drones can serve as the eyes and ears of soldiers conducting urban warfare. The Houthis use drone swarms to attack shipping in the Red Sea. Having the wherewithal to innovate and then to scale that innovation to military power is where the United States and China excel. Now, where AI is concerned, the United States has led the way and still leads it. But China is fast catching up and has an announced goal of leading the world in AI by the year 2030. And while both countries are innovating AI at rocket speed, they are involved in other races, such as the race to develop quantum computing technology. Indeed, China is working to build quantum computers so powerful that they can crack all of today's encryption, which would have massive military and economic impacts. The United States, however, continues to lead in foundational research where AI is concerned, at its universities and research institutions, in dominance in hardware, and in private sector innovation. The combination of research universities, venture capital, and skilled immigration creates advantages in the United States that are difficult for competitors to replicate. Now, unfortunately, U.S. domestic politics currently represents a greater risk to AI than any adversary does. The current administration's cutbacks to basic research at its universities and its draconian restrictions on immigration are self-defeating. Political polarization and a subservient Congress don't help. It's as if we were running a 400-meter race and started out 50 meters ahead, so we decided to slow down and tie a weight around our leg and allow our competitors to catch up. Nonetheless, venture capital remains robust, as does military spending. And there is strong recognition about China and its growing capabilities. that could prompt the administration to reverse or mitigate some of its current policies. Now, where military uses of AI is concerned, many describe the risk of autonomous operation of nuclear command and control systems and suggest that this is at least one area where the nuclear-empowered nations of the world can come together. Yet there are key differences between nuclear arms, which gave rise to a bevy of non-proliferation international agreements in the 20th century, and artificial intelligence. AI, as I mentioned, it's not itself a weapon. It is a collection of technological capabilities. Unlike nuclear weapons, governments do not have a monopoly over AI's production and use. There are actually disagreements about what constitutes a lethal autonomous weapon system. Autonomy is not binary. A weapon is or is not powered by nuclear fission, whereas autonomy exists on a sliding scale. Finally, nuclear weapons are expensive to build and difficult to hide, whereas what can be limited and verifying whether states have used AI tools is very difficult indeed. Now, given the state of U.S.-China relations, it behooves both countries to remain secretive about the developments of AI for military or national security purposes. The incentives for productive dialogue do not currently exist. One question that's related that we need to ask ourselves: does AI somehow change the theory of mutual deterrence that has undergirded nuclear weapons theory over the past decades? Mutual deterrence depends, after all, on rational actors adjudicating complex risk decisions in the context of somewhat complete understanding of an adversary's nuclear capabilities. But the fragmented AI development environment creates opportunities for the deployment of AI systems that may not have been adequately or thoroughly tested or aligned, increasing the likelihood of unintended consequences. Now, one would think that since we can foresee such risk, we can act to prevent it. And indeed, there are track 2 discussions underway. But the current constellation of world leaders seem uninterested, and until they are, perhaps, and I hope this never comes to pass, prompted by the actual deployment of a nuclear weapon, the risk of a destabilized nuclear world has indeed increased, and AI has to be included as part of that issue. Now, in terms of economic power and how it combines here. Geopolitical power is leveraged by economic strength. Now, the United States remains the world's largest economy with a current GDP of about $30.5 trillion. China is second with a little over $19 trillion. AI, however, is not a GDP competition. While in the United States, IA development is generally being left to the private sector, China has an evolving industrial policy for AI that is deploying across the full AI technology stack, from chips to applications. To reach its goal of leading the world in AI by 2030, China's industrial policy is focused on support for research, talent, subsidized compute, and applications. AI adoption in China is growing quickly across sectors, from electric vehicles and robotics to healthcare and biotechnology. But it's not all smooth sailing. There's been inefficient allocation of AI chips to companies in China, for example. U.S.-led export controls on AI chips and the equipment needed to produce such chips has limited the compute available to Chinese AI developers. And Chinese AI firms like ByteDance and Baidu, already complain about being compute constrained. Now, at an April 2025 Politburo meeting on AI, President Xi Jinping emphasized self-reliance and the creation of an autonomously controllable AI hardware and software ecosystem. Chinese state support will be essential for AI progress there, in at least 3 ways. First, developing domestic AI chips and a sanction-resistant semiconductor supply chain to compete against U.S. export controls. Second, addressing talent constraints. And third, rapidly scaling energy production to meet a 3-fold increase in data center demand by 2030. But state planning has a fundamental weakness where AI development is concerned. AI relies on fast-changing, wide-ranging innovation, frequent paradigm shifts, such as the emergence of reasoning models, makes long-term state planning difficult. Now, in contrast, the U.S. is competitive in AI, but without any meaningful state support. Instead, it is based on private sector investment and research. The AI market that draws in companies and investors is already valued at $750 billion and continues to grow at a rapid rate. Whereas the U.S. is falling behind. Where the U.S. is falling behind is on support for talent and for research, as I mentioned earlier. The reductions in research funding, the attacks on universities where the bulk of U.S. research is conducted, basic research, and the limitations on legal immigration, especially for students, may in fact limit AI innovation more than any regulatory regime could. If not reversed, that could lead to a fundamental shift in global power and security. China's aggressive industrial policy supporting AI will increase, if not surpass, its competitiveness with the United States. And if economic power equates to geopolitical power, we can assume that AI power can do the same. So that leads to the third pillar underlying the current U.S.-China rivalry, the clash in values. With the presidency of Xi Jinping and the consolidation of power in the Chinese Communist Party, China has become more autocratic. The United States, in contrast, remains, and at times, messy, very messy, democracy. And even though President Trump has autocratic tendencies and benefits now from a congressional majority that is under his control, and a Supreme Court that generally rules in favor of executive authority, the democratic fundamentals remain. Americans have lots of questions about AI. Is the underlying data biased? Who is accountable for flawed algorithms? Is there unwarranted trust in AI predictions? Does AI dehumanize social interactions? How do you deal with the lack of transparency about how AI systems produce results and evolve over time? These questions and others arise not from a suspicion about technology, but from a desire for assurance that such technology will not diminish Americans' sense of freedom and autonomy and their desire for accountability, transparency, and the rule of law. As a result, while in the United States there is a general recognition that AI merits some regulation or guardrails, there is no consensus about what exactly needs to be regulated and by whom. Now, we all know that President Biden issued a lengthy executive order encompassing safety and security security standards for the use of AI. But President Trump rescinded that order, and on July 23 of this year, issued 3 new executive orders and a new AI action plan containing policy guidelines to encourage the growth of the AI industry in the United States. Now, on the other hand, this spring there was a lengthy debate in our Congress on a massive tax bill, and an amendment was offered that would actually bar the states of the United States from enacting any AI regulation for 10 years, ostensibly to give the federal government time to act and to avoid patchwork regulation around the country. This raised fear of an AI Wild West. That was what the amendment proponents said. But the provision failed by a vote of 99 to 1. You can't get 99 senators to agree the sky is blue. This was pretty remarkable. So the individual states of the United States can be expected to continue to act even if the federal government takes a more hands-off position. And that's exactly what I mean when I say the democratic process can be messy. One AI application that reveals the value difference between the United States and China involves government surveillance. Now, China's surveillance system, as we know, is vast and varied. It includes Skynet, a mass surveillance program involving millions of cameras, internet surveillance, including monitoring and censoring online content, and a social credit system that evaluates and scores citizens based on their behavior, impacting their access to services and opportunities. In contrast, in the United States, such a system would be neither tolerated nor constitutional. Americans have a reasonable expectation of privacy under the Fourth Amendment and the right to freedom of speech and assembly under the First Amendment. Debates have erupted over even the practice of using cameras in cities to detect traffic violators, although the use of cameras has greatly increased, especially in our larger cities. A system of mass surveillance only works if you have the AI necessary to identify patterns and anomalies. Surveillance can operate to protect law and power and to provide a sense of domestic security. And the American system is not without its problems. The clash between the First Amendment and the plethora of misinformation in social media, for example. But the differences between the United States and China are profound, and they affect and infect geopolitics and AI politics. One final application of AI bears mentioning, because it affects nations beyond the United States, and that is the use of AI to interfere with the electoral process. A nuclear weapon can cause untold death and destruction, but democracies can also fail if their people do not believe their elections are free and fair, or if they cannot trust what they read and what they hear. Even though election interference between adversaries is not a new phenomenon, AI will increase its use and its destructive effects. It is something that we also must put on the AI agenda. Now, I can't finish this talk without addressing South Korea and its approach. As was mentioned in the talk this morning, the AI Framework Act here, adopted on January the 21st, is a significant step forward in balancing between innovation and regulation. And South Korea should be commended for becoming the first jurisdiction in the APEC region to adopt comprehensive AI legislation. Its key features: government support for AI data centers and learning resources, oversight of high-impact AI systems in critical sectors, transparency obligations for providers of generative AI products, and a moderate enforcement approach seem reasonable and balanced. Some questions undoubtedly remain and will need to be worked through before the act takes effect at the beginning of 2026. And significantly for our purposes, for geopolitical, geosecurity purposes, the framework carves out AI used in security or national defense. One wonders how such a carve-out will apply to dual-use applications of AI. Nonetheless, South Korea has stepped forward and has offered the world a useful lens through which to govern this ever-evolving technology. A few last points. First, reaching any kind of global agreement on the uses and applications of AI is highly unlikely in the current era. This is not a technology, as I mentioned, like nuclear weapons. And absent a true crisis in the deployment of lethal autonomous weapon systems, the U.S. and China have no incentive to sit around a table and reveal what they have. Moreover, it is unclear what the United States would actually advocate for, as its strategic approach to AI remains uncertain. Nonetheless, regional frameworks, like the EU, APAC will offer regulatory frameworks which may put some guardrails on this evolving technology. Second, AI will be an intense area of competition between the U.S. and China, which will impact their respective AI political power around the world. Third, the technology competition between the United States and China overlays fundamental societal differences. And we all know the world is not just about the United States and China. But nonetheless, what the United States and China do now has impacts to all nations globally. Finally, it is an open question how the U.S. and China will choose to coexist. But one thing is certain, the fight for AI dominance is on. The speed and continuation of AI evolution will continue, and it will present opportunities, great opportunities, but also great challenges for all of us. Right now, what I would say is we simply don't know what we don't yet know. Thank you very much.
네, 이어서 서울대학교 이근 교수님의 주제로 나폴리탕 교수님과의 특별 대담이 진행되겠습니다. 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Good afternoon, Lee. Seoul University. Right. Can you hear me? Okay. I think they hear me. It is an honor to have you here, Seoul, and it is also a pleasure to have a conversation with you. I received a lot of questions before. Thank you for a few very important questions. And let me begin related to your country. You already mentioned and also criticized a little bit about artificial intelligence action plan recently announced by the White House. It is composed of 3 pillars. One is artificial intelligence innovation, the second is AI infrastructure, and the third one is AI diplomacy. I think that AI diplomacy is somewhat misnomer. It must be diplomacy about artificial intelligence. So could you re-evaluate, I mean you already evaluated a little bit, evaluate the Artificial Intelligence Action Plan recently announced by White House, and some of the key insights that South Korea needs to take into consideration.
So, the AI action plan that was recently released, which has the 3 pillars that you described, really it should be called AI aspiration. It's not what I would view as an action plan. Lots of questions remain. Which federal agencies are responsible for what? What are the timelines that are to be expected? What are the milestones that need to be met? It lays out very clearly, and the way it's been covered, I think, is accurate, which is that AI development in the United States will be market-driven, as opposed to the function of any kind of regulatory regime. And you can see that in the stock prices of some of the big companies involved in AI. But in terms of being an actual plan that you can look at and see, okay, where are we here? What's next? Who does what? It leads all those questions over.
As a professor at UC Berkeley, I'm sure that you have a very liberal perspective on the AI development and innovations, and you emphasize upon the regulation, and you criticize the so-called handoff approach by the federal government. But when it comes to US-China competition on artificial intelligence, if you regulate too much while China deregulate a lot, then you might be losing the competition against China. Of course, there is a problem of ethics and social values, as you mentioned. And also, if you deregulate a lot, then it might be a race to the bottom. However, you cannot lose the competition against China. How would you deal with the Chinese, the so-called hands-off approach for artificial intelligence?
Well, you know, there is an assumption by many that regulation automatically inhibits innovation. I think responsible, smart regulation done in conjunction with industry actually will help build overall trust in this technology. And as I mentioned, Americans have a lot of questions about AI. And in terms of adoption and so forth, as we were discussing this morning, that trust is going to be very, very important. So I think we will see in the United States some attempts at some regulation of some parts of AI. And it will be done at the state level. California, for example, which has a huge AI industry. I live in the Bay Area, and you can't go anywhere in the Bay Area without seeing some feature of AI. Will undoubtedly take some action, but other states will as well. And in a way, this is the way the United States government is designed, where the states, the individual 50 states, are the so-called laboratories of democracy, and things are tried out there before they reach the national level. In terms of how this affects our competition with China, it'll be interesting because already you see, for example, the EU is regulating AI, and the big companies, they have to comply with those regs and things already. So it's not as if we have a regulation-free world in which the industry operates.
I'm sure American democracy is very robust, and it's going to be as robust as before. But one of the weaknesses of the American system is the so-called lack of overarching national governance architecture in terms of artificial intelligence. For example, when it comes to cyber hacking problems, China has a nationally governed cyber system. Therefore, it has upper hand in defending, for example, American cyber attack. But the US system is very fragmented. The cyber system is managed and run by and owned by the private companies. And the government cannot regulate all these private companies to defend against Chinese cyber hacking. So you don't have the so-called deterrence capability against China, and you have the problem of the so-called public-private partnership problem in defending against Chinese cyber hacking. So what kind of response measures do you have in mind and solutions can you come up with?
Yeah, so cybersecurity became an ever-growing problem when I was the Secretary of Homeland Security. I like to say that when I became Secretary in 2009, the number one security threat we were combating was still aviation security. And I spent maybe 10% of my time on cyber matters. By the time I left, 4.5 years later, I was spending 40–50% of my time on cybersecurity. And there had been various attempts at federal legislation which had failed in part because private companies came into Congress and said, we have an interest, we have every incentive to regulate ourselves, don't impose the federal government on us. Now, what we ended up with is a weird system where there are cybersecurity standards established by an agency of the Department of Commerce called NIST for critical infrastructure. And cyber hacking into critical infrastructure, those events are monitored and investigated through a division of the Department of Homeland Security called CISA. But it is still overall a voluntary system. What we have seen, however, is that where operators of critical infrastructure are concerned, cybersecurity has risen in the public consciousness, has risen in their consciousness to the degree that they are doing much more to protect their systems from cyber hacking. But it is not, as like in China, a top-down, everybody shall do this or else system.
According to a recent article in Foreign Affairs, artificial intelligence can might help in defending against Chinese hacking by developing the so-called cyber twin. So you can have a cyber twin developed by artificial intelligence, and you can detect the pattern of Chinese hacking. Then you might be prepared for the future Chinese hacking. Perhaps that might be of help to your system. The Chinese system is heavily centrally governed. Therefore, yeah. And you mentioned during your keynote speech about economic power, and economic power driven by the artificial intelligence, and you are competing against China. That is for sure. And there are views by certain economists like Jin Kei of London School of Economics or Jeffrey Dean in George Washington University, arguing that innovation is twofold. One is breakthrough innovation, I'm sure you know that very well, and the other one is process innovation. And another aspect of innovation is diffusing innovative technologies to a wider industrial sector. And in terms of economic development, and in terms of economic growth and economic power, these two scholars argue that diffusion may be more important than breakthrough innovation. And Jin Kei is arguing that China is better at technology diffusion, and Jeffrey Dean is arguing that the US is better in technology innovation. From your perspective, I mean, this is a serious problem because US and China are competing in this area. So do you think the US is still ahead of China in terms of both breakthrough innovation and diffusion of technologies?
Well, I think we're certainly ahead from what I know in terms of what you call breakthrough innovation. But there is an interesting question because China is very focused on integrating AI applications into practical aspects that happen right now, and it seems that many of the U.S. companies in AI development are focused on really the development and improvement of AGI and so forth. I think in the end the U.S. is going to have to do both. That is, people are going to, as they become used to AI, as they use AI, they're going to expect to see it, and they're going to want to see it, and the diffusion will occur organically or naturally. It won't be the product of government policy.
Okay, let me now turn our eyes toward U.S.-Korea relations. I think the alliance relations will be very much reconceptualized because of the development of artificial intelligence. And how does the U.S. Conceptualize alliance relations from an AI perspective? Specifically, the U.S. is strengthening AI technology alliance and encouraging alliance nations to adopt American technology stacks. How should alliance relations be redefined in the AI era? And what rights and obligations do you anticipate countries participating in technology alliance will have? And particularly in the area of interoperability of weapons system, we may have to share the AI platforms together. We may have to share a lot of sensitive data. Then there might be a problem of dependency towards the American AI platform. And as you know, the platform always creates the so-called network effect.
Yeah.
So it is not only a problem of military interoperability issues, but also the problem of sovereignty, dependency. Therefore, these two countries need to be concerned about a lot of issues. So how do you really conceptualize our alliance relations?
Well, that's a narrow question. The U.S. Depends on alliances and partnerships around the world. And the strength of those alliances is in part dependent on the amount of bilateral sharing that goes on between allies and partners. And it seems to me, and this is one of the unanswered questions in the current administration's approach, as to in the AI world, particularly as it's integrated into new platforms for weapons and surveillance systems, satellite systems, so forth. What will be shared and under what conditions? On the other hand, we get a lot of value back from our allies and partners, and so it seems to me that this should be a matter of diplomacy between allies and partners as to what will be shared, under what restrictions or conditions things will be shared, and how the alliance will work together moving forward. And it won't be one moment in time. It won't be like, okay, we're going to have a meeting with South Korea now and figure out how we're going to share our military integration of AI. It needs to be an overall iterative process that happens regularly over time and guided by the best principles of diplomacy.
I agree with you that this is going to be an evolutionary process between the two countries. And aside from interoperability or sharing the sensitive data or platform together between the two countries, there is the problem of, as you mentioned, misjudgment. There is the problem of disinformation, problem of accidental conflict. So there are a lot of things that we need to worry about, particularly in terms of whether or not we can trust the artificial intelligence 100%.
Yeah.
So in the military arena, these problems are a lot more important because this has to do with lethal weapons. So what kind of measures can we come up with to deal with these problems? I mean, it has not only to do with democracy, but also to do not only security, but also democracy as well.
There's no easy answer to that question. If there were, it would have been answered already. But I think the key thing is where the data and technology is being used and integrated into weapon systems, that there be some standard set for assuring the integrity of that data and to monitor the integrity of that data. And to make sure that it is the cleanest data, if I can use that word, available. But as I mentioned in my talk, for example, lethal autonomous weapon systems, they're being used now, but they are very, it is a real, to me, open question. The degree to which we have lethal autonomous weapons and take humans out of the equation. I think that's a fundamental question that needs to be addressed.
And as for the decisions that field officers have to make under very urgent conditions and situations, there is the problem of the decision-making process or delegation of decision powers. And between the U.S. and China, as far as I'm concerned, these two countries have a very different system of decision-making process and delegation of decision powers. For example, in China, even if you are a field officer, until you get the approval from the top, for example, President Xi Jinping or generals, you will be very reluctant to make the final decision, even if this is a very urgent situation. But in the USA, you may have to delegate decision powers to the field officers. Then you can respond to the urgent situation a lot more efficiently, effectively, and quickly. So this is not an artificial intelligence question. This is a question of human system or the institutional system. So in those two aspects, do you think, which one do you think better? Because we are dealing with, again, autonomous lethal weapons. Do you think America has advantage in terms of combating the Chinese against the Chinese soldiers, the battlefield?
Well, one would hope that the United States and China were never in an actual kinetic warfare event. That would be disastrous for both countries and for the world. The United States military is a strong and effective fighting force. It's been involved in numerous conflicts over the past decades, so it's a very experienced fighting force. You're exactly right. The leadership is delegated down and out amongst the force, so that you avoid that problem of having to elevate things up the chain and then wait for messages to come down the chain. China, on the other hand, operates differently, and they have not been involved in an actual war or battle in the last decade. So their fighting force, in a way, is untested. So we would have to see, right? But hopefully we won't ever see.
I agree, 100%. I would like to go back to the question of sharing the platforms between the two countries. The current Korean government is planning to develop sovereign artificial intelligence of our own. So we would like to have Korean version of ChatGPT Perplexity or Gemini. And from American perspective, is it better for your allies to have sovereign AI system, and is it better for allies to coordinate the security issues together? What is your ideas and thoughts about Korea having its own sovereign artificial intelligence?
Well,
Do you think we need to focus more on the edge artificial intelligence rather than sovereign AI?
yeah, I always favor coordination amongst allies and partners. I think that's one of the values of a true alliance and a partnership is coordination and sharing and the like, so that you're strengthening each other as you move forward. Theoretically, you could have different chat GPT in every country in the world. Whatever, but from a exchange of military platforms, exchange of that kind of systems, having coordination and transparency between allies and partners, to me, is the way to be strong.
I see. Again, the question of U.S. AI diplomacy. So Korea is now at a very important location in terms of supply chains.
Yeah.
And artificial intelligence supply chain is going to be of significant, very important issue for U.S. AI competition vis-a-vis China. What roles do you think U.S. allies need to play in terms of facilitating or assisting American AI competition vis-a-vis the U.S. and also enhance the global stability and security?
Do you mean what role does supply chain should play? Or?
Allies can play in terms of the supply chain rearrangement or supply of key components such as semiconductors, talents, human resources, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think one of the things that needs to be emphasized is the importance of the fact that there is an actual global supply chain where AI is concerned, and that key elements of that run through our allies and partners. And the notion that the United States can isolate itself and its AI industry from that supply chain is unrealistic. It's just not the way global trade works. It's not the way the global economy works. It's clear that the current administration is very focused on onshoring activity into the United States, particularly manufacturing capability. It's clear that they put federal monies into developing semiconductor manufacturing within the United States. TSMC, for example, is building a huge fab outside Phoenix, Arizona, where I used to be the governor of Arizona, so I've kind of paid attention to that. Intel is there, other companies are there. So, and that's going to happen. But that does not obviate the fact that there is going to be a supply chain for other material besides that needs to be recognized and incorporated into our diplomatic activity, our economic activity, and can I say the word tariffs, and so forth, so that there's true alliance and partnerships with our friends.
Relating to the supply chain security, recently the Trump administration permitted NVIDIA to export a key component of its the artificial intelligence, the H200 GPU, and that is somewhat surprising to me because your government is trying to slow down the development of Chinese artificial intelligence. But at the same time, now you are exporting, you allow NVIDIA to export key components of artificial intelligence.
And the United States gets a cut of the deal.
Currently 15%, right? From the NVIDIA, the government is going to receive 50% the profit.
Yeah, I think that is a very unfortunate and unwise precedent for the United States government to take. To take a cut of the revenue produced from selling a valuable technology to a possible adversary, it seems to be unwise in the near term and for sure in the long term. Because it won't stop with NVIDIA. Now there'll be other companies that will come to the government and say, let us sell this sensitive technology and we'll give you 15%. Let us sell that sensitive technology and we'll give you 15% or 20% or whatever the notion is. And export controls, as I said in my remarks, are an important part of the overall U.S. AI security strategy.
There are two opposite views about export control. If NVIDIA can sell in China, then NVIDIA will make a lot of profits, and they're going to reinvest in the AI innovation, and NVIDIA is going to be one step at least ahead of China in terms of AI competition. Therefore, it may not be that harmful for NVIDIA to export its semiconductors to China.
I think NVIDIA is making plenty of profits without that.
Without that.
I'm not too worried about that.
But on the other hand, if you apply export control too strictly, then China will have every incentive to come up with its own develop its own semiconductor capability, so that China may not have to depend upon American technology or American semiconductors. So, there are pros and cons. Do you think if U.S. apply export control too strictly, then China will, in the future, come up with its own sovereign semiconductor capability?
Well, President Xi has already stated that China wants to be self-reliant where these technologies are concerned. But to develop the high-end chips that we're talking about will take time and patience and investment and so forth, as opposed to getting chips ready-made already from an American company. So, and again, the precedent of the United States government taking a share of the profits from the sale of technology that has been controlled by the U.S. government for years just seems to me unwise. It's a very, how do I say this? In some matters, it shouldn't be all about the money, but it was kind of an all about the money deal.
There's also a view that is unlawful.
Yeah, there is a view, and whether or not that's litigated, I can't say, but yes.
We have 2 minutes left.
Oh,
It's 15 minutes left over there, but we only have 3 minutes. So before we finish our conversation, would you like to add a few insights to the security issues related to artificial intelligence? Or I may have a question as a person who's in the same profession as yours, about education paradigm. I have to teach my students, particularly international politics, social science, and humanities. And artificial intelligence is going to change a lot about how to educate, how to think, how to find alternative solutions.
oh, for sure.
Yes, so as a professor and as a former Secretary of Homeland Security, could you add a few insights on either national security or education before we finish this conversation?
Well, I think that the key challenge where AI and higher education is concerned is how do we continue to teach students to think when AI is easily available to them. So, for example, you undoubtedly assign students to write papers on this topic or that topic, and that required them to do research, but also to think through what, for example, I usually assign my students a paper to design a policy about homeland security, affecting, say, cybersecurity or disaster response or something. And they have to think through and give me a proposal with pros and cons and so forth. Now that they can just go on ChatGPT or and say, give me a draft policy on cybersecurity for the Department of Homeland Security. Boom. Where in there do the students learn how to think things through? So I have no qualm with using all kinds of expedited systems to find research and all the like, but it's losing that ability to educate students how to think that I worry about.
I agree with you, absolutely.
Yeah.
The thinking is the most important part of human.
Well, we just had a presentation on AI and creativity, and some of that is the same, right? Same issues.
Absolutely. It's been an honor to have conversation with you, Madam Secretary. I think we learned a lot, and I hope we can continuously share our insights together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
AI 안보와 AI 주제로 또 좋은 말씀 해주신 두 분께 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 다음 세션 4는 AI와 법에 관한 조금은 더 전통적인 분야라고 할 수 있는데요. 세션 4 키노트 연설까지 듣고 휴식 시간 갖도록 하겠습니다. 펜실베니아 대학교 와튼 스쿨의 조셉 해밍턴 교수님께서 알고리즘 기반 가격 설정을 주제로 키노트 발표를 해주시겠습니다. 네, 조셉 해밍턴 교수님, 네, 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
So it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about how algorithmic pricing, fueled by AI, is affecting market competition and what it means for the prices that consumers pay. So algorithmic pricing is simple enough. It involves inputting data into a software program where the output is prices. Those prices and resulting profits will then be used to modify the software to make it better. Now, there are many advantages to a firm from using algorithmic pricing. Algorithmic pricing can assist in quickly and profitably adjusting prices to changes in the firm's environment, including competitors' prices and changes in demand. Algorithmic pricing allows prices to be tailored to narrow market segments. And there are many pro-competitive efficiencies from algorithmic pricing. It results in markets clearing faster as prices respond more quickly to new information. It contributes to more price discrimination, which can enhance welfare by pricing higher to the rich and lower to the poor. It can reduce labor costs in the monitoring and adjusting of prices. And it lowers barriers to entry, as trained pricing algorithms can substitute for market experience. Now, while many companies develop their own pricing algorithms, increasingly they are choosing to outsource it to a third party in the form of a data analytics company. What happens is that the firms share their data with the data analytics company. That company then trains a pricing algorithm based on that data and other data that they have. With that pricing algorithm, the data analytics company inputs current data to generate prices which are recommended to the subscribing firms. And finally, those firms decide whether or not to implement those prices. Outsourcing has occurred in the U.S. hotel industry, where most of the major hotel chains are using the services of a data analytics company such as Rainmaker. Property owners on the Airbnb platform are receiving recommended prices from Airbnb's smart pricing algorithm, and gasoline stations in a number of countries, including Brazil, Canada, and Germany, are automating the adoption of prices generated by a data analytics company such as Calibrate. Now, there are several reasons for why it makes good business sense for a firm to outsource its pricing to a data analytics company. A data analytics company will have more data, as has the data of all subscribing firms, and more data means a better algorithm. It will have more expertise, as it can support a team of data scientists. And it has greater incentives to acquire more data and more expertise, because the development of a better pricing algorithm can be licensed to many firms. So while there are these efficiencies from companies outsourcing algorithmic pricing, a problem does arise when some of the data analytics companies' customers are competitors. By advising competitors on how to price, the data analytics company may restrain competition and result in higher prices. This antitrust concern has been expressed by various institutions. The OECD has said concerns of coordination would arise if firms outsource the creation of algorithms to the same information technology companies. And the United Kingdom's Competition Agency has warned if a sufficiently large proportion of an industry uses a single algorithm to set prices, this could result in the ability and incentive to increase prices. Now, there are three ways in which anti-competitive harm can emerge when competitors have algorithmic pricing supplied by the same data analytics company. First, the data analytics company and subscribing firms could have a price fixing agreement. That is, an agreement whereby the pricing algorithm recommends exclusive prices and the firms agree to implement them. In the United States, data analytics company Ideas and some of the leading hotel chains have been accused of having such an agreement. Quoting from a plaintiff's complaint, defendants have agreed and conspired to outsource their independent pricing decision-making to a single common pricing manager, Ideas, which has willingly facilitated and enforced the conspiracy. Such an agreement is unlawful in the United States, it's unlawful in South Korea, and probably all jurisdictions with a competition law. In addition to cases against hotels, there is currently private litigation in the United States involving apartments, equipment rentals, and health services. A second avenue for anti-competitive harm is that a data analytics company and firms have an agreement to exchange information which has the effect of raising prices. The Antitrust Division of the U.S. Department of Justice is currently pursuing such a case against data analytics company RealPage and apartment building owners. Quoting from their complaint, landlords have agreed with one another to exchange non-public, competitively sensitive data through RealPage's revenue management software. The third source of anti-competitive harm is when high prices are not the result of an agreement, but rather the unilateral conduct of the data analytics company. This possibility was first noted by the German Monopolies Commission when it said, a company knows it could contribute to a inclusive market outcome, and they may see such a contribution as an advantage, as it makes the algorithm more attractive for users. Now, this poses a serious enforcement challenge, because with harm without an agreement with competitors may not be a violation of competition law. In fact, the German Monopolies Commission went on to say, liability gaps can open up if the data analytics company brings about a collusive market outcome without the approval of the subscribing firms. This situation cannot, or only with difficulty, be addressed by competition law and the European Union. This legal difficulty applies as well to probably most jurisdictions. Now, two recent empirical studies provide evidence that prices are higher when competitors use the same data analytics company. Starting in 2017, many gasoline stations in Germany began outsourcing their pricing. On the slide, I'm depicting two stations in a market who could share their data with a data analytics company who would then provide back to them recommended prices. What the study showed was that in gasoline markets with just two stations, the study found that if only one of the stations outsourced algorithmic pricing, as indicated on the slide here, there was no change in the profit margins for that station. However, if both stations in the market adopted the third party's pricing algorithm, so both are sharing data with that third party and receiving back price recommendations, then profit margins rose by 30%. This is quite compelling evidence that the use of a common data analytics company at least can result in firms coordinating to raise prices. There's also empirical analysis of the effect of apartment building owners using the services of data analytics company RealPage. In this figure, the horizontal axis is the percentage of apartment units in a city using RealPage's rent setting algorithm. The vertical axis is the difference between the rent charged by a firm adopting RealPage's algorithm and the rent charged by a firm not adopting it. If the estimates, as I'll describe in just a moment, are above that dashed line, then rents are higher by using RealPage's pricing algorithm, and rents are lower if it is below the line. The first finding was that when demand in the housing market is strong, it was found that if the apartment building owners using RealPage charged higher rents. And this effect is stronger when a higher fraction of apartment building owners in a city are using it. So this is the type of effect one fears. However, when demand is weak, rents are actually lower by using RealPage's pricing algorithm. And again, this effect is larger when more apartment building owners are doing so. This result is consistent with the pro-competitive rationale for algorithmic pricing, which is that it makes prices more responsive to changes in demand. However, the study then went on to test to what extent are the rents consistent with competition, or are they consistent with joint profit maximization? That is, the rents are being set in a collusive manner to maximize the profits of all the apartment owners who are subscribing. And they found more evidence in support of the rents being collusive and estimated that this cost consumers on the order of $1.5 billion per year. Now, the market for algorithmic pricing services creates a serious policy dilemma. On the one hand, outsourcing to a data analytics company delivers genuine efficiencies. But how can that be permitted while at the same time preventing the possible anti-competitive harm from having competitors use the same data analytics company? Laws are already being proposed in the United States. The U.S. Senate has put forth, but not passed. In fact, they haven't even voted on it, the Preventing Algorithmic Collusion Act. But cities such as Philadelphia and San Francisco have passed laws restricting the use of pricing algorithms to set rents. In my last few minutes, let me discuss some general solutions to this problem. The conclusion which you'll take away is that this is a hard problem and we're still in search of a solution. Now, one policy is laissez-faire, that is, do nothing. And such a policy is really unacceptable because the risk of anti-competitive harm is high when competitors allow a common agent to influence their prices. And as we know from the studies of the gasoline and apartment rental markets, there is already evidence of such harm. Another approach is to restrict who can use the pricing algorithm. One could prohibit the data analytics company from serving more than one firm in a market. While this policy ensures competition is not harmed, it comes with large inefficiencies. Some firms would not be able to use the services of a data analytics company. It would also give an advantage to large firms who could internally develop algorithmic pricing with their large data sets. That is not an option for small firms. Alternatively, one could allow competitors to use the same data list company, but adopt regulations limiting what they can do. One could restrict the data that the data list company uses to train the pricing algorithm. This is, in fact, is the approach being proposed and implemented in the United States. Specifically, it limits the use of non-public competitor data. To explain that, suppose firms A and B are competitors, and they're both using the same data analytics company. A pricing algorithm that recommends prices to firm A would then be prohibited from being trained on or otherwise use private data from its competitor, firm B. I've written a report evaluating this policy and identified two weaknesses to it. First, it obviously creates some inefficiencies by reducing the amount of data that can be used to develop better pricing algorithms. Second, and really more importantly, it may not actually prevent the anti-competitive harm. One of the things that is shown in the report is that a dataless company can design a workaround. So if it wanted to set exclusive prices, it could and still abide by the law. And the flaw to this approach is that the problem is not shared data, but rather shared objective. The concern is that a third party may share an objective with firms to create high profits, and that can lead to high prices. And a remedy needs to address that shared objective. Finally, there could be regulation restricting the design of the pricing algorithm. That is how the algorithm uses data to generate prices. However, thus far we've learned that this is a hard problem. And in particular, the challenge is to restrict algorithms to prevent the anti-competitive harm without unduly interfering with the efficiencies from the data analytics. In concluding, the challenge of companies outsourcing algorithmic pricing is a difficult one, but it is harming consumers as I speak. We need a remedy, and we need it soon. Thank you.
네, 알고리즘 기반 가격 설정 관련해서 심도 있는 발표를 해주신 해리턴 교수님께 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 저희 이제 15분 정도 휴식하고 4시 30분에 다음 패널 토론을 시작할 예정인데요. 특별히 이번 패널 토론은 3개의 패널 토론이 서로 다른 장소에서 동시에 진행이 됩니다. 너무나도 다 흥미로운 주제로 진행이 되기 때문에 선택이 쉽지는 않으시겠지만 행사 프로그램 참고하셔서 원하시는 주제의 패널 토론에 참석하시면 됩니다. 알고리즘 기반 가격 설정에 대해서 보다 심도 있는 토론을 들어보고 싶으시면 여기 한라홀에 그대로 남아 계시고 AI와 저작권 측면에서 다양한 논의들을 들어보고 싶으시면 신라홀 1로 사법제도, 특히 법원에서의 AI 에이전트와 관련된 새로운 논의들에 대해 들어보고 싶으시면 신라홀 2로 이동해 주시면 됩니다. 신라홀 1, 신라홀 2는 나가셔서 왼쪽 복도를 지나가시면 됩니다. 행사 프로그램은 명찰 뒤에 QR코드를 스캔하시면 좀 자세한 내용을 보실 수가 있으니까요. 내용 참고하셔서 바로 이동을 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 패널 토론 종료 후에는 여기 한라운드로 다시 모여주시면 되고 5시 30분에 마지막 세션을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.